Well, why don't we get started anyway? Welcome, everybody. This is our Wednesday update on what's going on in the market, both in rentals and sales and everything under the sun related to our new existence, sheltering in place, and with massive unemployment and the effect on the rental market. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining me today. I have lots of interesting things to share with you. I'll start off with the update on what's going on in the rental market. As far as rents coming in have gone, if you recall, last month we had about 14 people who asked us for immediate forbearance based on the conditions of having lost jobs at some point in March, and they were facing a problem coming up with the money in April. And we dealt with those, just telling people that we weren't really necessarily going to be able to, couldn't do anything about it right now, and we were going to welcome them to do what they possibly could in order to get by, and we would treat any unpaid rent as a deferment. And once we figure out how far this goes and how bad it gets, we'll come back to them and figure out how to collect the past due portion. So we had 14 tenants who asked for deferment, and we had 20 of 30 commercial units, which are in addition to that 484 units who asked for forbearance, and all of those were pretty much complete forbearance at that point. Last week on Friday, after our call, I emailed all of our tenants and just let them know that we're still here, and we would prefer that they approach us openly and not run from the problem if they are going to be experiencing an issue in May or beyond. And we wanted to have them tell us what was going on, and I explained that we would collect some sort of documentation from them that showed that they had had a job before, or that what their situation was. And I wanted to be able to show that we could justify that they were affected by COVID-19 shelter-in-place issues, and really my approach is that I don't want to chase people about this. I don't want for them to just stop paying rent and run away. I also want to know, I want them to keep me updated as far as how things are going, and so I've had a number of additional conversations, and we actually doubled the number of tenants who were asking for and able to prove their situation. We're up to 27 apartments who are saying that they are facing income-related problems, job losses as a result of having to shelter in place and non-essential businesses being shut down, which, it still brings us only to about 5 or 6% of our overall residential portfolio, which is, still pretty good. It's pretty solid. And I've only had 1 or 2 conversations that didn't seem 100% right, or that were just really difficult. I had one where a gentleman told me he already was unemployed for 6 months, and he had run out of unemployment benefits by the time he got to March 15th, and he was totally without any benefits on March 15th when everything fell apart, and he was actually circling back with a couple of employers and going through some employment, final rounds of interviews at that time when the companies pulled the plug on hiring entirely, and his final options were exhausted. He mentioned that he'd heard somewhere that he might get another 13 weeks of benefits. He was totally up to date on his rent when we spoke earlier this week. But he isn't able to pay rent anymore, and he's running low on savings at this point. So, it supports the assumption that we all had that many people would be, motivated to dip into savings to try to pay their rent, which is, it's good, and it's something that as landlords, we are glad to see that they're not, that they're not completely without reserves. But on the other side of it, I don't want people paying, the rent to the detriment of their being able to pay for food and medicine in the short term. And so that's the conversation that we've had with those tenants. I did have one tenant who approached us asking for a reasonable deferral, not paying May's rent and then paying it back over the course of 5 months, which is totally within his right. But he also had a guarantor, and I made sure to explain to this tenant that if this goes on for a long time, and he's in the food service, so I don't know if the restaurant he works in is making it on is a line cook. I don't know if they're making it on delivery and take out business. But I made sure to remind him that I'm aware that he has a guarantor, and if he goes, too far beyond, too far past due on his account, I'd like to ask him to ask his guarantor for assistance. And he agreed that his intention was to try to handle the problem on his own at this time and get out of it without asking for help now. So that was encouraging that at least we're able to have that positive dialogue. An update on the Dean Preston legislation. A week or two ago, he made a proposal at the Board of Supervisors to make it so that all landlords were no longer able to file for any evictions in the future if the non-payment of rent is related to COVID-19. So any unpaid rent from now until the end of May we would be unable to file for an eviction. And the San Francisco Apartment Association and several of our other industry organizations, the Coalition for Better Housing, Small Property Owners, the San Francisco Association of Realtors, Professional Property Management Association of San Francisco, all were involved in sending this letter on Friday to the mayor, basically explaining that the mayor certainly had the ability to postpone any eviction hearings and to delay the process, but that the executive branch of the government, even with the mayor relying on the executive order from the governor, does not have the right to permanently remove and disenfranchise landlords, our community, from being able to use their judicial rights to try to collect rent. And the interesting sort of multi-step case that was made in this argument was that this legislation is actually even worse than if it weren't to happen, because it is likely to result in a long tail of even worse evictions. Because if you think about it, a lot of tenants, if this passes and they try to enforce it, a lot of tenants are going to think, well, gee, I don't have to pay that ever, and I'm permanently forgiven, even though there will be an immediate legal challenge. And a lot of people may find themselves thinking, I'm scot-free, I don't have to pay for a couple of months worth of rent. And when all of this goes to court and is adjudicated later, they may find themselves having to defend against this when it's proven to be illegal and not fair, and not allowable for the legislative or the executive branch to rob a group of people, landlords, of their right to exercise judicial remedies for these sorts of situations. Obviously, we have no hope of being able to collect any rent if we don't have the judicial remedy of being able to file a lawsuit to collect it. So it's interesting as we go through this process, to sort of see how the wheels are turning and the conversations are going, and the conflicts between the different branches of the government are being discussed and possibly resolved. So, at this point, we're hoping that the politicians will, resolve these issues on their own without needing to have us file a lawsuit, have the different industry organizations file lawsuits. At some point in the near future, we may have to ask you all for a contribution to help to defend our rights in this circumstance. But right now, nothing. I don't have any specific updates, though. I anticipate that I'll have Denise Ledbetter to help us on Friday for our legal update conversation on Friday. So, right now there's nothing specifically new to report, but I also did receive a lot of response from tenants who didn't need help, saying how grateful they were to see that we were willing to work with people and willing to help out their neighbors and their fellow, building residents. So it's good. I'm glad that the tenants know that we're there for them and that they're ready to have a conversation. So with that, I think what I'd like to do, Josh had a couple of things he wanted to talk about related to the sales market, construction, and some interesting news related to Chase Bank being willing to work with us on commercial loans that are challenging to pay when tenants aren't paying their rent. So Josh, why don't you take it from here and let us know what's going on?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. So in regards to the sales market, no huge updates. Sales are down, new listings are down, closings are down. So kind of status quo on that. The numbers continue to drop. So nothing really new there. I had an interesting call from a client today, or actually late yesterday. Hotel executive, her pay has dropped by 50% because of the virus. She calls me and says, well, so Josh, she lives in a house with her mother and her brother. She says, I want to buy a condo for them. Then I want to sell, then I want to buy a house for myself and then sell the house I'm living in. What can I do right now? And I said, well, that's a terrific challenge for me. And I'm thrilled to take it on. But in this circumstance, there's numerous roadblocks that we hit now. So 50% pay cut means she can only qualify for 50% of the loan that she's looking for. We probably couldn't prep her house properly. It's not essential business to do the floors, do the paint, do the windows, whatever it would be to improve the house. I couldn't get it staged. I'd probably have to get a bridge loan for her to buy a house prior to selling her house. I don't know what that market's like. Long story short, what we're experiencing and what I'm experiencing is everything that kind of new pops up. The basic answer is we're waiting. We're just going to have to sit on the sidelines. I mean, there's just, if you can do 2/3 of what a normal transaction is, but you run into an obstacle on 1/3 of it, it kills the whole deal. So the conversations I'm having with people are kind of ready to get back in and ready to buy and ready to transact. And then there's just so many obstacles. So that's kind of, so we're, again, the sales market is kind of frozen, but there are transactions still happening. People have to buy, people can buy vacant properties. The credit markets have not completely frozen up. So there are things happening, but just a lot of hurdles and restrictions. So that's kind of the sales market in a nutshell. I had a conversation with Chase Bank today about commercial debt. They do have a couple programs for borrowers. They're offering for deferments, and this may relate to other commercial lenders too. They might have something similar. Have you spoken to First Republic at all, JJ?
I haven't, not about any specific loans, no.
So I'm assuming that other lenders have similar programs, but Chase being the kind of the biggest dog in the market, it was interesting to talk to my rep there. So they're offering two options. One option, both of these options are 3 or 6 months. Option one is that for your loan, you pay interest only for 3 or 6 months, depending on what you're approved for or what you asked for. At the end of that period of time, they will take the principal that you have not paid. So you pay interest only during that period of time. At the end of that 3 or 6 months, they'll take the principal that you have not paid, add that onto your loan, and it just gets amortized out for the duration of your loan, whatever it is. If you have 15 years left, 20 years left, whatever it is. So it gets amortized, it gets tacked on and amortized. So it's a nice benefit. I mean, you know, depending on what your principal payment is over that 3 or 6 months, it should be relatively insignificant in terms of your payment. And if we stay right around 20% of rent loss, I mean, so this obviously is going to apply. This is an option for people who don't have massive rent loss. So that's option one, pay interest only for that period of time. And then the principal you have not paid gets tacked onto to your loan. Option two is kind of more severe. If you're in a more severe situation, you pay zero for 3 or 6 months. You pay neither principal nor interest. And so you have no payment. So let's say you've lost 60% of your tenants, 70% of your tenants, whatever it is, you pay zero. At the end of that period of time, you actually take that whole amount of money and you're owed that money over the course of 24 months. So it's actually harsher and kind of more difficult on a borrower. So you take that, you know, so let's say it's 6 months and your payment is $3,000 a month. So it's 18 grand. So you have that 18 grand and then you owe that 18 grand over a period of 24 months in equal installments. So I was talking to Chase and I said, well, you're really incentivizing that option one then. He said, no, it's not that we're incentivizing it. It's just that, you know, we're you know, it's just more difficult on us to take in zero. And I said, you know, roughly it's you're incentivizing, you know, the option one makes a whole lot more sense. It keeps money flowing into the bank and then they can just kind of treat the principal as basically as a refi. So the other thing with option two, if you pay zero towards your principal and interest, is that you can't refi out of it. So if you owe them $18,000 or whatever it is, and then you say, okay, well now at the end of my 6-month period, I want to refi and pay you back that $18,000 I owe you. You can't do that. You can't refi out that debt. So you have to, if you want to pay that money off, you have to get it from another source, pay it off, and then you could potentially refi and kind of pay yourself back with that as an option. So it's, you know, the way I see it is option one is going to be great for people who are taking a 20%, 30% loss on rents. Option two is kind of, I'd, you know, obviously try to avoid it, but if you're down 60, 70% rents, it's a nice option. It buys you some time, but that, you know, paying it off in 24 months, you know, you're looking at roughly an increase in your mortgage once that mortgage turns back on of roughly 25%. And so that's a big hit, right? And so, you know, who knows how your rental situation is then, if your rents are down or if you have vacancies, whatever it is. So I was at least happy to learn that it's a relatively simple process to apply. It's a basic hardship letter, and they assess why you can't pay that and what's going on with your rent rolls and what the kind of future looks like for you. And then it sounds like it's pretty easy to get approved, I'd say. He was saying that very few of his clients, he does a lot of business, he said very few of his clients have done this, either of these options, but all of them are calling about it because everybody, you know, myself included as a landlord, I'm okay now. It's just as it, you know, 2, 3, 4 months, and then more tenants who can't pay, then it starts to get a little more dicey, and everyone's looking at what their kind of options are. So that's overall a positive thing, and that's Chase. On the construction side, so essentially what most people who are involved in construction projects, myself included, everybody wants to continue working and everybody wants to continue building. There are debts, there are costs in terms for shutting down. There are, what's that? Okay. There's a lot of, everybody is motivated to continue working. So what I'm seeing a lot of is everybody is kind of looking for exemptions. So you have the order that says XYZ type of construction needs to shut down, and there are ABC exemptions based on that order. So I'm seeing a lot of people applying and saying that they're exempt from the order to shut down. And also, most developers, GCs are involving attorneys in writing letters to the building departments and saying, hey, we're exempt for this reason or that reason. And so that's, everybody wants to stay safe and healthy, obviously, but then, at the same time wants to continue working, especially those construction workers who are outside. There's a fair amount of distance. They're wearing masks. So there's just a lot of activity in terms of looking for exemptions. And right now, the city, at least Oakland, and I don't have an ongoing project in San Francisco, Oakland's not really entertaining a lot of exemptions. I think we're kind of in the middle of really trying to keep our virus numbers down, and they're being very serious about it, which makes total sense. And we're respecting those laws as well. And so, again, just a lot of anxiety. People want to get back to work. Construction workers obviously are looking to get paid and support their families. So as far as I can tell, where most projects are stuck, at least through May 3rd, I'm trying to figure out to what degree things may open up and they may allow construction projects to proceed. And people who I know who are talking to building departments, they're saying that the building departments are saying they don't really have a read on what Newsom's going to do or their counties or whatever it is. So it's kind of a wait and see, and a lot of anxiety attached to it in terms of getting back to work. So
that's definitely true. I've got some seismic retrofit projects we're working on that, one is mandatory, one is voluntary. And the only difference between them is one has 4 apartments upstairs and 2 commercial down. The other has 6 apartments upstairs and 1 commercial down. And the 5 units and up is required to go through the mandatory program. The 4 units is not. And I'm trying to work with the building department to have them recognize that finishing any sort of a seismic retrofit project is a high priority, and that nobody has less of a response or less of a exposure to seismic danger because they're sheltering at home. We still have the same, growing likelihood that there's going to be an earthquake in the not too distant future. And so I'm trying to explain, look, I got, a bunch of people living in this 4-unit building. The units are large and have lots of people living in them. I need to secure the building. We need to keep going. I can certainly understand their perspective that, a residential kitchen and bathroom remodel or a high-end home model in Pacific Heights is not necessarily a top priority, and that the next door neighbors, certainly benefit from not having non-essential construction going on. But at the same time, construction is still important. I think in my conversations with the contractors, I really do think there's a pretty good likelihood that construction may be one of the first businesses that's allowed to go back to work.
Yeah.
As soon as the shelter-in-place orders are starting to get relaxed, just because it's still important to do the work. It's still important to get the jobs done.
And you can do the work pretty safely.
Yeah, construction sites, they're used to having, safety and health-related regulations on site. There's a 4-page form that you fill out and post at the job site for, COVID-19 security, social distance, 6 feet of separation, and who's the coordinator at the property for this purpose. And that's it. There's a lot of information, but these are guys that are used to wearing, personal protective equipment on the job every day anyway.
Yeah.
So what's the problem? As long as they don't gather too closely at lunchtime, they probably
Right.
don't work too closely to each other on a regular basis.
Right. And staff at our site, they're under strict instructions, obviously mask on all the time, hand washing station outside and inside, and then
Right.
strict instructions about, hey, if you're working now because you want to make money and provide for your family, we understand that, we're supportive of that, but you cannot do anything else other than go home when you leave work.
Right.
You have to,
You're not hanging out in the street.
this is your 1 out per day, and you go home and you keep yourself safe and you keep your coworkers safe. And so, with those kind of instructions and management, I agree in that I think they do bring back quite a bit of construction. At least I hope so.
I certainly do too.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions about our conversation or things they want to talk about?
This is Jeff Goodstad. I heard of a bill that was introduced in the California legislature mandating that landlords reduce the all rents by 25%. This was
Yes.
introduced.
Yes, we talked about that last week, and there's the California Apartment Association mobilized a letter writing campaign and a website that I can share with you. I'll send you an email. But just in the last week, Phil Ting, the sponsor of the bill, has received over 30,000, and this was a week ago, so probably more, 30,000 letters saying that was totally unfair and not reasonable. And so, certainly would value your signatures on those, on that letter writing campaign. I don't think that has much legs personally, just because it's kind of random and it kind of doesn't relate to anything in particular. Personally, I think he's pandering for his next job and trying to prove his bona fides as a protector of tenants. I don't think it's likely to pass, but it's the standard sort of thing that we typically see in California and from a former San Francisco lawmaker. Yeah, but my personal opinion is I don't think it's got much, but it's not very viable. And I think that the bottom line, and we've talked about this before, is that you are all more representative of your average landlord across California. With a few units here and there, or a few larger clients who have multiple buildings. But a lot of this stuff is assuming that the standard landlord is a greedy, huge corporation that is, looking to find any way to increase the rent, including, kicking people out of their apartments for no good reason, or forcing them out when they have a momentary interruption in their income because of a global pandemic. And, as I can tell you from my experience in working with all of my clients, I haven't had a single conversation where someone said, can I leverage this to get a vacancy out of my tenants? And so, the vast majority of us are honest, upright, upstanding citizens, and our purpose here is to try to preserve the community in the long run. So, yeah. Anybody else have thoughts or ideas? We'll be having another meeting on Friday, once again, with Denise Ledbetter, our legal counsel and our conduit to the political process. So you can feel free to join us again on Friday. As always, send me an email, give me a call. If you need anything one-on-one, happy to be there for you. Josh is also available as our senior sales agent to help out with sales-related information. We're expecting, I'll be aiming for that first week of May to give you the rent payment stats and to get everybody up to date on what's going on with our portfolio. But I'm trying to get ahead of the curve, and so you've got the sneak preview today of what we're expecting, but you know, I had a flurry of responses to my email on Friday through Saturday, and then it died down, and then a few more came in Monday, Tuesday, and you know, mostly all I'm seeing at this point is updates from people that we've already heard from, which is really what I'd like to hear. It's what I want to know, is that people are wanting to tell us what's going on instead of running from the problem and knowing that we're there for them. So with
JJ,
that,
I got a question.
yeah,
I got a question.
yeah.
Yeah. We talked about for sales, but in terms of filling empty units, do we have, some places are hiring, some places are hiring a lot. So it's not all down. It certainly is down with the gig people probably. But that's my question, is there still a market of rentals who are actually benefiting at this point?
I don't know if the individual populations of people whose jobs are hiring is necessarily a large enough group that I would see it in my small sample of apartments. But I'll say that we haven't had better than zero success with leasing. We have rented a couple of apartments in the last few weeks, and we've had a few instances where we've posted apartments for lease and told people to call us, and they're interested. And so we're holding, you know, weekend open houses, you know, letting people in one at a time, trying to abide by the social distancing guidelines at the same time as, you know, doing our business. And, you know, there is some interest, and, you know, it's a logical response to what's going on, but we're looking more deeply at a tenant's income and asking questions about the viability of their business that we wouldn't have normally asked before. You know, typically we would look at somebody's work and say, okay, this is, you know, legal certified work that has 3 times the monthly rent and gross income, and, you know, it's reported income, it's legal income, it's not under the table, it's not cash, it's you know, backed up by pay stubs that are recent, that kind of thing, and we rent to them. But, you know, if someone came to me today and they told me they were, you know, a hairstylist, or they had you know, they own a restaurant, or they, you know, worked at a restaurant, or any sort of non-essential business, you know, I would ask questions about the viability of their job for the next few months, because I certainly don't want to rent to somebody based on a pay stub that might be, you know, oh, my last pay period ended a week or 2 ago, and, you know, have them lose their job 2 weeks into it. I mean, I would certainly rather have an empty apartment that's not paying any rent than have an occupied apartment that's not paying any rent. So, you know, at this point, you know, we're looking a little more closely at that. We did rent an apartment here in the building where our office is located, and, you know, the tenants are employed at companies that don't have any reason to be shutting down or scaling back. They're able to work remotely, and so we were happy to get the apartment filled, especially because we're coming up with another vacancy in this same building at the same time. It's been probably 6 or 8 years since we've had a vacancy here. Now we've got 2 out of 4 at the same time. But that's the approach to the rental market is, you know, after the initial shock, the first couple of weeks after the stay-at-home orders were issued, everything was done, and now, you know, we're trying to really be careful, thoughtful, and sensitive to the situation, and not jump into anything quickly. But, you know, how do we continue to operate without, you know, in this new reality?
Thank you.
Sure thing. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, JJ.
I just had one comment.
Sure.
I'm not sure how long this is going to last.
Yeah, neither are we.
And obviously, if it lasts too many months, you're going to see a growing number of people
Yes.
unable to pay their rent, and
Right.
a shrinking pool of people who can move into a place with enough money and a job security.
Right.
Do you see the job? I mean, do you see rents being affected as far as having to start offering discounts to get a tenant?
Well, that's a good question. And right now, it's felt like everybody is, despite the momentary interruption in our market, people are, in general, they believe in the fundamentals of our economy, especially in the Bay Area, because we have a good economy. We have lots of good paying jobs, and we're expecting that this is going to be temporary, even if temporary turns out to be 3 or 4 months, or 6 months or however long. It's a developing situation, and right now I'm counseling my clients to remain firm with pricing and not to reduce prices too dramatically, because as we all know, we've been through a downturn every 8 to 10 years in this market anyway. And if you rush to get your units rented, oh my goodness, I'm losing $3,000 a month for this one unit. So I'm going to reduce the rent by 10% or 20% or more. You're going to be stuck with somebody who's got a below market rent a lot sooner than if you wait a couple of months and ride this thing out. So I haven't noticed a large group of people, clamoring for rent reductions, or a large group of owners, property owners, eager to reduce rent as a result. But I do, tenants, this is a buyer's market now. Tenants have leverage. If they apply, I'm happy to talk to them about, a reasonable adjustment in the price to get them in the door if they're willing to move in, soon. So,
I have a thought on that, JJ.
Yeah.
You can tell me if this is a bad idea, but I have a client that we're leasing for, and they said, hey, I want this top number is what I need, and this is what I think the unit's worth. But I'm worried about people being able to pay it, or I don't want to be greedy, or I want to help out. And I said, well, how about we do a first month's rent free? Let's get your top rent. Well, let's give them the first month's free, because that also helps in right now, in that they just have to pay a security deposit and live for free for the first month. That seems to be like a nice way. It's a way of building in a discount, but you still kind of maintain that higher number. If they end up staying there for 3-4 years, you won't care about that. First month free. I don't know if you're doing that much at all with other clients.
a little bit. I mean, I would prefer to collect some rent up front, so I might do like the second month free instead, or have it be, I'll give you the keys now, and you can move in now, but your lease doesn't start for a few more weeks, that sort of thing. Some people are concerned about, probably more in San Francisco, maybe Oakland and Berkeley too, any rent controlled jurisdiction having the rent board construing such an arrangement, or even like a renewal that includes a free month's rent, as being the landlord adjusting to market forces, as opposed to recognizing the tenant's individual financial hardship. You're allowed to reduce the rent for your tenant if they're experiencing a financial hardship, and maintain your base at the higher number. If you are reducing the rent to meet the market because the market is falling, the rent boards in the local jurisdictions tend to say that that's a permanent reduction to meet the market, and you're not allowed to go back to the original number. So, in this circumstance, that's certainly, if someone's coming to me and asking for a 10 or 20% reduction, that can be a counter. Why don't I start your rent, start your lease June 1st, and you sign the lease now and move in May 1st, and see what they say about that. That's not a bad solution at all, and it certainly does lock you in. I would probably collect 1 month's rent up front and have it, just so you have some consideration at the front end of the deal. But collect 1 month's rent after July. That's fine.
Yeah.
So that's another way to be flexible. But right now, nobody knows what the market is. It's it's not there. I have a friend who tracks the Craigslist volume, and I'll reach out to him and see what he's seen as far as the volume of postings on Craigslist. With recognition that lots of people, including him, are really good at making multiple posts for the same listing to keep their ad at the top of the page. Even despite the fact that the data is not exact, it gives you an idea of what the the traffic in the market is. And I'd be interested to see what January, February rental market numbers were like. How many postings were on Craigslist in San Francisco or Oakland or Berkeley versus how many are there now, and whether this is the standard volume of March, April traffic, because this is typically when our market starts to really recover, March and April, and we start to see a lot of demand. I mean, this should be a very busy time where I'm rushing to get places on the market because I'm excited to get the rents, and I've got plenty of time. So, we've totally ruined that part of the market for this year. And it's just going to depend on how long this goes before people start to, truly adjust their pricing.
Yeah, it could be worse. It could be happening in November.
Yeah, that would be, yes.
It really did.
Well, I mean, it's already basically dead in November, as you were well aware.
Very, very dead.
Yeah, very, very dead. I mean, this is the level of listings that I have that I'm able to, I'd have, 4, 5, or 6 more units on the market by now if I hadn't had to stop non-essential construction. I had my main general contractor working on 3 or 4 projects that he couldn't finish. But I'd have a bunch more units and I'd have a lot more showings, and I'd be checking out keys every day from here in the office, and it'd be busy in this office at this point in the year. And it's quiet because the door's locked. So, don't come in here. Don't come borrow the keys. Don't go look at an apartment because, we don't want to die. So there you go.
Yeah, there's that.
There's that. There are more important things than rentals, but, they're pretty important.
So just for information, I'm in LA. They didn't stop construction here. They allowed it to continue. So they stopped it in San Francisco.
They did. That was a few weeks ago. They added that, and I think it was primarily as a result of pressure from the tenant groups saying, look, if everybody's got to stay home and they have to work from home and they have to be, sheltering in place and they can't go out, we can't have construction projects going on, where number one, it makes a lot of noise and it bothers the people who live there. Number two, it's also lots of extra people coming and going from the building that could be exposing the people who live in the building to additional potential ways to be infected with the virus if they're infected and they don't know it. So, it's pretty reasonable, but at the same time, I look at the, once again, the seismic projects that I'm working on, where those projects don't involve the residents of the building. The residents have a separate entrance. They're not, we're entering and exiting through a restaurant, in both circumstances, or a vacant commercial space. And so that project can be done without exposing the tenants to any further vectors for disease. And there's certainly the noise issue, which I've heard from people about. But I would say that my personal perspective is that the seismic safety is worth the inconvenience of the noise. All right, well, thanks everybody. It's good seeing you all. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you again on Friday if you can make it. Thank you for your time and for your questions. It was really great to have you on the call. Take care. Have a good rest of your week.
JJ.
Everybody.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
JJ. Thanks.
Thanks, JJ.
Bye.
Bye-bye.